Wonderful. So thank you, Evelyn. And here we are for our second session. So thank you everyone who joined last time and also everyone who is joining us today. My name is Yashkeem Desai, and I am the founder principal at Ariana Digital. Ariana Digital is a horizontal boutique software consulting company. And what that means is we deliver business solutions. It's about the business and the customers. And in there, we integrate our technology partners. And at this point in time, we are partners with Microsoft, Adobe, Salesforce, and Snowflake. So that's a little bit. And in terms of my background, I have over 17 years in digital, all the way from infrastructure at the data center, capacity management level, all the way to managing marketing programs and digital transformation product rollouts for large corporations. And then most recently, we have entered into the product space for an AI-powered product. So that's a little bit about us. And for today, though, we are going to talk about the more subjective aspects. So last time was intro, and the next two sessions are going to be extremely hands-on tools and automation and to see things working. But today is a little bit of a discussion-oriented session where it is not like, it's nothing like yin yang or black and white here, right? It's everything is subjective in terms of what works for a situation and what doesn't, but there are some guidelines that we'll talk about, and also the risks that we want to highlight. So with that, let's go ahead. A quick disclaimer. Because AI and how it translates into the world, it is subjective, but it can also get political and it can also have implications which can be beyond what we state right now. AI is evolving, so few disclaimers I do want to make sure we all understand. Ariana Digital is not a law firm, and I am not a legal professional. We are practitioners who try and keep in touch with how the industry is evolving and what things as a business we want to keep in mind for our practice and our products. So that's the idea here. It is purely for awareness. And if there are any questions, I will definitely suggest you reach out to the professionals, like if it's law, then legal, or if it's consulting, then with us for due diligence, or any of your agencies for due diligence, right? So there is more to it. And then, of course, I have to announce that this is an AI-assisted content. Obviously, and clearly, me being in loop here, it is human interpreted and human delivered. So those are a few things that we wanted to get out of the way before we jump into the content. Awesome. So here's the discussion flow today. Like I said, it is about bringing awareness in terms of what is AI, why is it so risky, right? What are the risks? And then also not just that, what are the things we want to keep in mind in practice as media professionals or as small businesses in order for us to stay compliant. And there are multiple regulations, as you will see here, multiple regulatory and governing bodies that are trying to put a handle around AI. So we'll talk about that. So we'll go over the overview for those of you who are joining in today. It's going to be quick. We will just refresh the idea of AI and what makes it be the transformation agent that it is today. Ethical risk, we touched upon that, but we will dive into the nuances of it this time. And then LLMs. A lot of you guys asked talk about the LLMs and some of the top frontier models. So we'll talk about those from a risk standpoint today and in terms of functionality or features next time. And then the legal framework. So let's get into this. We will start at the top with a quick overview of AI. So first up, AI overview. Now, why is AI is not a software risk, right? So this is what we want to start with. Why are we talking about this, and why is it so important that we as humanity, honestly, is taking a look at this with a very with a lens, like a magnifying lens. So AI is everywhere, whether you are looking at hiring, credits, healthcare, name it, AI is already here. We are being delivered content generated by AI. We are being scrutinized and given prescriptions or recommendations in your health world. Your transcripts go through AI. They get recorded with AI before it touches a doctor. Credits, right? So your credit approval today is already being validated with AI. There are fraud detection agents that are providing you inputs for potential fraud. And these are all the great pieces, the positive aspects of AI. But the same piece, if unknowingly put in the wrong hands or used in wrong ways, can cause equal amount of havoc. And I will start with the story that occurred recently. And I don't know if many of you are into technology and already heard about this, but just a few weeks, like late January, there was an incident where a developer named Peter Steinberg built what they call as a prototype of AGI, right? It's a bunch of agents that can sit inside of a desktop with complete control of the computer and can be managed on a text message. Now, it went as far as, and this guy had no guardrails. This was like a hobby project, if you will, but it was so powerful. It literally is what, an Apple stock went up 20% or a Cloudflare stock went up 20% just because of this project. And here's why. The one example that a developer who tried it said was they were out, driving somewhere and they wanted to get an order, like a restaurant, table booked. All they had to do was go on Telegram, say, please book me, whatever, a restaurant booking at a Chinese place today. I want to go there. This agent from there in that system went out and searched, tried to book. The booking wasn't there, but it reasoned out that there are alternate solutions like humans do, right? Problem solving. And it actually used like a calling system to make a call and book that table, right? So this is what it's coming down to. And that was just eye-opening. And at the same time, when security checks were run, it was found that there were so many vulnerabilities that this put out in production without balances in checks could be a huge disaster. And so this is called, that product is now OpenCloud. It's still out there, but a lot of people are putting in kind of guardrails around it at this point in time. So don't be surprised if Apple just takes it and it's on your iPhones at one point in time, very soon. Anyway, so that's the reason why we are talking about AI and the risks behind it. Now, why do these risks occur? We touched upon this last time. AI by itself is based on predictions. It's based on probability. It's math. So it doesn't understand the context unless it's provided with a certain context. And what context it gets is up to the user, right? So if it's in the hands of a wrong character, that persona is going to create bad outputs. Or unknowingly, if you give it wrong context, it might be doing actions that are not in line or in ethical from a humanity standpoint. Also, it has no emotion. And if there are no checks and balances, things go pretty fast. So things move fast. If you have 5 connected systems, each doing an AI in this agentic world where you put 5 agents doing different things, there is lack of trace and it goes quickly across the board and you can't trace back unless you have guardrails in place. So to summarize, we are looking at large deep learning neural networks. They can generate content based on the learning pattern. So what data you put in, the training data is super critical. It will percolate out into the outputs. What context you provide is very important because if you're going to predict, if someone's going to predict like a credit score, if an agent is going to predict, am I eligible for recruitment? It is, again, based on the content and the rules that have been put in place and decision support. how much do you want to hand it out? In that example that I said, it was an autonomous agent that also does reasoning, because now we have reasoning models. So how much of that do we want to put out in the hands of autonomous agents? And how much do you want to have control over that as humans in loop? So that's a little bit about AI that we need to keep in mind. Context is king, and obviously the training data matters. And transparency at the point of usage, which we'll talk about in just a little bit. Now, before we move on, I know this is a lot of theory and a lot of talk, unlike last time or unlike the other sessions. So I'll be doing a lot of talking, but I do want to make it interactive. And here's a call out. If you have seen anything or if you have questions in the space or observations that you want to share, please feel free to use the chat and we can have a discussion, maybe in between or at the end of it. And to begin with, I'm pretty sure a lot of us have used AI in different ways, like we mentioned, and like we saw last time, be it just for basic LLM use cases or trying to build small automation. So here's a question for the team, you guys. How confident are you that AI outputs that you are seeing today are accurate? Like, what is your experience? Like, if you've used it, have you found it to be accurate, helpful? So where do you guys stand?
For me, I use it and I find it to be helpful. However, I don't think it's 100% accurate because I've got output that have asked for, but when I checked, the data was not correct. So I wouldn't say it's 100%. I would say somewhat accurate, but it's there, but it's very helpful just for me to validate certain information as well.
Got it. So you're saying it's more like a starting point. It gives you an outline, but you felt like you had to change it up to get to a point
That
where
is,
you use it.
yeah, but get me wrong, it's very helpful.
Yeah, yeah. No, I hear you. And if I may, is it any specific LLM or a specific tool that you were looking at when you uncovered this observation?
What was I asking for? I can't honestly, I don't remember, but I know the data wasn't
And
correct.
that's all right. That's all right. And
Yeah.
I'm guessing it was an LLM, maybe like a ChatGPT or
Oh yeah, if you're talking about right, yeah, chat. I use chat. Chat, and then I use Microsoft Pilot.
Mhm.
But to me, it seems like between both of them, it seems like Microsoft Pilot seems to have more accurate information than I did with ChatGPT because I did do a comparison in both.
I think
And
that's
Mhm.
fantastic you bring that up, because remember I just said context. Now here's the thing. If it and we will be looking at Microsoft Copilot examples of automation in our session 4. But context that Microsoft would have will be more vetted because it's your documents, right? It is what you have in your SharePoint, or it is what you have in your Word, and you're asking them for asking the agent for more information on top of that. So it just
Mhm.
allows for more validation. Whereas with ChatGPT, that context window in which it is working, unless you're using some of the connectors in ChatGPT, which also we will see in the next session, you will be getting more variant results to what you're asking. And that's where the prompting comes in play, connectors and context comes in play. But yeah, that's great. So let's see, we have 68% saying somewhat confident, and I feel like that gels with what we just said. People are not 100%. We don't see 100% results, but it has proven to be helpful, and which is why we are here talking about here are amazing benefits. Now let's talk about the risks and controls. Super. Anybody else want to say, jump in with any other thoughts, questions, observations? Want to share with the team? Okay. So we do need to get to the LLM action, which you guys asked for last time, but we will get into the nuances of the ethical risks that we just barely pointed out, okay? And see how that really gets categorized, because based on those ethical categories or risks, we have regulations put around them. The frameworks that you will see are essentially tied into the big risks that come out of the AI analysis, right? So we looked at these, and let's talk a little bit about each one and see how they translate into impacts or concerns in our world today. So bias and discrimination. Now, here's the thing: there are always going to be pros and cons, and there is no one right answer. Although on the surface, if we would say bias and discrimination, right, we need to handle it and we need to tighten that up. But the generative aspects or the creative aspects of an AI model are its power. And so a lot of data that is fed in is also a reflection of our society, right? It is a reflection of the differences, and they translate into bias, because that's unconscious bias too. So if we were to say, okay, we are going to have a marketing algorithm or an AI, which is to sell to children, or which is to sell to a specific population, because that's your product. We are all digital people here, a lot of us, not all, but a lot of. So how do you balance out the idea that you're not going to discriminate and you're not going to have a bias, but at the same time the agent is able to have an outreach to the right target population, that audience that you want to reach out to, and that's your monies that you're putting into digital marketing are efficient, right? So there are all these kind of concerns that we will have to keep in mind when looking at some of these issues on the table. Again, opacity. There are agents and humans by nature. The thinking process or the algorithm happens in a black box. What comes out are the results. So what is it that we want to do in order to make sure that we can justify a decision that an agent we deployed did? So that is something this specific area brings out. Scale and speed we spoke about. Once an agent is deployed, the scale at which it connects with other agents in an agentic world, and how errors or even information propagates, is not only fast, it is something that you cannot reverse. It's irreversible, right? So we have to have proactive measures in place. Data exploitation, again, this concern comes up, like Google has had to face a lot of brunt around this, because the Google ecosystem is all around marketing and search, but they have the Google products that are very much integrated into or their AI agents are integrated into their products, right? So you have Gemini that is way into the search now. How do we ensure that the big technology giants, the frontier model makers, are not going to exploit this data only to get bigger and stronger? And the same applies to other firms, even down to firms like ours, where we are looking to work with AI products. We do have to keep these considerations in mind. Over-reliance. We have seen what social has done, right? We have kids, if you've seen ourselves too, you are on the phone. Now multiply that x-fold, and the over-reliance that you might have, where human brain is a muscle. As soon as we start transferring the thought to a machine, what happens is we are not evolving forward, humanity is evolving backwards, right? And that gives more power to the machines and to the people who manufacture them. So while I'm a huge proponent of AI, completely immersed, I do feel like these are important issues to keep in mind as you build out, but also in your own life, in your own personal and social life. So that raises 4 areas of concern that most frameworks and most regulatory bodies are looking at right now. First one is social concerns, economic concerns, emotional, and physical. So let's take a look at this. This was just a slide to ground us on the concerns. And now let's jump into the nuances of each one of them. So with social concerns, I know you will see it and you'll realize it, but this puts it in a perspective. What are those things that we need to be aware of in terms of AI deployment when it comes to social concerns. Facial recognition. Facial recognition on my phone is amazing. I just look at my phone and it opens up I don't have clicks. I'm happy. But is this also being utilized to collect data on me? Google started giving us beautiful photo albums, right? Just based on like events. And that was during just ML on deep learning networks, right? So that was but now with agentic AI, what else could they do? What else could system programmers do, right? So those are some of the things we have to keep in mind. If you're going outside for, let's say, retail, and we have facial recognition now coming in, and that pops up e-commerce recommendations for you with the new agentic solution, maybe even ship an order to you without you knowing it. How would you feel about that? It is convenience. It is amazing. As digital professionals, we're going to see that happen, but there are considerations in terms of transparency that we will need to keep in mind. Hiring algorithms, I didn't touch upon that. That is so pertinent to our business because our product that I mentioned, myndQ.ai, is actually an interview practice assistant. So it is in the hiring space. And we definitely want to keep in mind that when we do help power the workforce, that you are empowering them, not using the data to kind of isolate people away from what their potential could be just on predictions. Content moderation and ethical tension. So we spoke about the ethical tension a little bit and moderation, right? Where do you stop? What is the balance? And that's not 6-7 like the kids do again, the teenagers, but that is the tension, right? You want to have the efficiencies and you want to scale. You want to have the productivity and the benefits, but at the same time, can we put controls in place to ensure that we have understanding, traceability, and an action plan? So those are the things that we will be looking at. Economic concerns. I don't even have to mention these. These are some really hard-hitting concerns that I've heard from a lot of people. It's all over the news. Job displacement, and this is also a cycle. So even when we had like an industrial revolution, there is a cycle when skills have to change and adopt. So part of this is the evolution of how we want to upscale, how we want to look at our jobs differently. That's the transformation part. And part of it is the displacement, which is some jobs are not going to be required anymore, right? Because those will be taken care of by the agents that we put in place. So that's the tug. What you want the benefits, and then wage compression is something from a hiring standpoint that the market signals are sending right now, which is because we have agents doing the job and humans entering at the same time. Is it going to give us less like wage compression, right? Am I getting more value out of an agent versus a human becomes the question. And that's the value part. Compensation is always associated with value. And AI privilege. I feel proud to be bringing this session because of this reason, invested in the fact that we want to have competition where everybody understands AI. It's not for those few people who are well-versed with the tool, understand the risks, and move forward quickly, but it's also to bring forward others in the market who can then compete, because I believe that competition is what sets us apart. America is based on small businesses and healthy competition. So this is another area that we have to watch out for. Now, obviously, there is going to be an economic imbalance at this point in time because AI cannot be deployed by everybody, right? So we have the tech giants. And that's where a lot of movement is happening in terms of investments and infrastructure. But at the same time, for the opportunities that open up, I feel like the general people, as well as small businesses, do need to start utilizing those resources as a competitive edge. Okay, like I said, this one is a lot of subjective discussion and talk. It is not a lot of hand holding and like the cool let's do this or show this stuff. So we'll continue down the path of uncovering what these concerns are that we need to keep in mind. And the next two that we'll be talking about are the emotional and psychological concerns. And of course, physical safety. So this is emotion and physical. Those are the two sets of concerns that pop up next. AI feedback. Now, I don't know how many of us have actually gone on like X or a lot of these social networks, even Reddit for that matter, right? And what you see is pretty pictures, usually women, who have been put out there, and there are like a million hits on that, right? And these are gorgeous people who a lot of ordinary people can never look like or be like. Now, what is that doing to us in terms of our self-worth? Are we now competing against AI in terms of our self-worth, our feedback, our companionship, that the dependencies that it can evolve into, especially in the younger population who are not mature enough? So also deep fakes, right? So likeness of people can be manipulated, can be changed and used for benefits. Now, all of these comes in social media because we have access to the customer facing, the customer experience, and things that we need to be careful about. You don't want to have, put in an AI agent does content generation and then creates content that goes out, which falls in any one of these categories because it definitely has detrimental effects. Now, this was the emotional part. And we do see that, some examples of how that's showing up. And then there's the physical. So physical is where we actually have bots. So bots in the future is actually software embedded into hardware, right? And so if you see a Boston Dynamics, today it's a puppy or a dog, whatever they call it, but what if that becomes a humanoid robot doing actions? Or even our autonomous cars that are now out there on the roads in Texas, right? So they are reality. Healthcare diagnostics. So safety concerns are always something that these corporations will need to keep in mind. You don't want to rush in. So remember how with Boeing, they rushed out a product, I think it was Max 747, and then they had problems. So if companies start rushing out without proper testing, we are going to see problems and much bigger ones, right? So that's the whole idea of AI safety concerns that corporations need to keep in mind. So I don't mean for us to feel depressed with all the concerns, but this is the reality. And it's not to say let's stop innovation, let's not use AI, but it's about having the right mindset, having the right perspective and education to move forward to start reaping those benefits by minimizing, I won't say without because we don't know what without looks like, but minimizing the detrimental effects potentially. All right, so now we'll talk about the technology. That was all in terms of humanity and the heavier aspects of the risk that we were talking about. But they do stem from technology. They do stem from these algorithms or neural networks that are in place. And our LLM models, we need to understand then the source of where this starts, right? And each of them with how each LLM model is set up, because even with agentic workflows at the base, we have these LLM models built into your system designs. So at this point in time, we have multimodal or the foundation, the frontier models, as they call themselves, multimodal, text only, video, whatever that could be. These are then plugged into various systems and connectors and tools and interfaces, right? And that's how an agent happens. So let's look at those models. They are based on four critical aspects. Their capabilities or their risks are based on four critical aspects. What is the ecosystem that they plug into? This, I feel, is a major one. It doesn't get talked about as much, but if we go into we just spoke about ChatGPT or even Claude, we have connectors into multiple applications. So you have the LLM, But as soon as I connect that with my Notion, or as soon as I connect it with my Teams or Outlook, and there are thousands of such applications now connected into your LLM, and vice versa. Every application you open up has an LLM sitting underneath that, trying to help you in little parts and pieces, but it adds up. So the API ecosystem is where the scale is going to occur, the expanse is going to occur. And some have more of these integrations than others. Multimodal, when you have the vision aspect coming in with your voice and your textual, that is just a much more powerful, impactful AI right there. And context limits, we spoke about that. Hallucinations a lot of times come from losing context, right? It pulls in from every other space and just confidently creates an answer. So context windows and how those contexts are handled is super important. And privacy. So first, we're going to go through, I'm going to quickly jump through the top strengths and risks of the major frontier models. And then there is the slide summary, which will also give you a perspective. It's like a quick reckoner, if you want to see what each one is placed for, what would they stand for. So with OpenAI, this one was the biggest success that really landed AI into the world as we see it today. And it has a very strong, and they were also the first ones to use the decoder only transformer model, which allows for a lot of power through multilingual. It allows for vision and reasoning, which they have invested in now with Sora, and they always had DALL-E. So they have a very strong ecosystem. The other aspect of OpenAI is that API ecosystem. They are connected both ways heavily into almost every application that exists today. So think of any application, either if you go into the app store of ChatGPT, you're going to be able to find a function that links you out, or you go into the application and the application underlying, has a connection into ChatGPT. So ecosystem is, excuse me. So this is a huge strength. And the risk is hallucination because of the expanse of data that it has. It's basically just taken in, eaten up all the internet data. That's how OpenAI was trained. So training and what data was fed into it matters. It essentially just replicates that data, and it doesn't have a lot of context by itself unless you bring it to that focus area. And so hallucinations are still kind of persistent in terms of the training data that it did take initially. Now this is changing. The more recent reasoning model, which came out 2 weeks ago, I think that's ChatGPT 5.3. 3 might be coming out soon, but they changed that. So now they're working towards making their reasoning models more context context sensitive, right? Being able to handle more context as well. Anthropic. We spoke about Claude, and their focus right from the beginning, they split out of the founders and the team split out of ChatGPT. So coming in, they had this idea of, we want to create an AI, a frontier model that is very much like ChatGPT. So they literally almost follow that path of every functionality and feature that ChatGPT releases. And that's still behind on the vision model, which I mentioned, it's mentioned in the risk, and they are lagging in that aspect. But they're also overly cautious because they came out of ChatGPT and they wanted to make this very efficient or constitutional for corporate usage. You'll see a lot of corporate clients, business clients work with Anthropic just because they rather be on the side of being refusals more than a bad answer coming out on the other side. So, and also they have a huge token window of about 200K, and I think that is increasing as well. So this is a very fluid path, and the best place to kind of go and check is always on the official websites. Gemini, we spoke about Gemini. Gemini is this massive ecosystem, and even before ChatGPT, Gemini, Google was the leader. Now, obviously, they have challenges in terms of branding they are very confused brand. They have 500 different things with no clarity on what does exactly what, like what is the distinctive advantage. But because of their underlying infrastructure and a place in the market that is across search, across the whole Google suite, they actually are able to have the largest reach in terms of distribution. If you talk about distribution, knowingly, unknowingly, Google definitely has the largest reach. And that is where they are able to soak in more data. So more gets more gets bigger, right? So big gets bigger, that's seen. They are able to soak in more data for better training or more, I don't know if it's better or not, but for more personalized training. And that also helps to make their ad models better, um, or more catered, more personalized. So that is the cycle in which Google is putting Gemini. There's Chrome. You have a Chrome desktop assistant now where right in your browser you can start chatting. So it's a direct competition with Copilot that we were talking about earlier. And the biggest part about Google is it has been a multimodal from the beginning. So some of their video models, the YouTube, they actually can read. Their models are trained on YouTube. And the quality of data, the user generated content that they get from YouTube is immense. So that's where they're able to compete with like a TikTok on the user generated content. They're able to compete with a Microsoft Copilot, with Chrome and some of their tool sets. So it's a very big an expanse of ecosystem and AI agents out there. Llama. I don't know if a lot of people have heard about Meta's Llama model and Mistral. So Mistral is a EU model. It's a European company. And Llama is obviously Meta, but these are open source or open weight models. So Mistral is actually open source, which means that both the training data as well as the weights have been given out in the open. So anybody can go download that LLM or their AI model and then take it or tune it from there. Like I could change it to whatever I want and customize it for whatever I need, right? Now that has its own risk. We feel happy. Oh, now I know exactly what it was trained on. But that power in the hands of someone who wants to actually create bias. Now they can create more bias, even if it was trained on something else. It can be fine-tuned to domains. It can be fine-tuned to use cases. It's much lighter in terms of the hardware that people need. But it is definitely something that if used in production environments, then you have the capital cost and the maintenance. So there are other challenges with open source models, which is why closed source models or hosted models like the three that we saw before work better. Nobody wants to have a server at their house and then work through managing that. So that's the difference. So we would say, oh, just open source everything. But no, nobody has that infrastructure or the money to really have or host a model. Not many. I would say not say nobody, but not many companies or businesses have that infrastructure investment. And that's where the rub is, right? So solution based, how much you can invest in, what's your ROI, decides which model you choose and how you apply it. Now, this is the summary slide that I mentioned. This would be a quick way to go in and look at, okay, what are these models that we spoke about, the companies that offer them, and what are the key risks? What do they chase, right? So ChatGPT is chasing benchmark. It wants to be the smartest model on math. So it's doing coding tests, math tests. It has focused on hallucination now, but not. But it wasn't, that evolved compared to some of the other models before. And personality. Now, there's something called as personality. Yes, GPT sort of has a very flat personality because they never focused on the personality aspect. They focused on making it that AGI that Sam Altman always wants to talk about, right? Everything, push everything, and then it'll learn. Claude, on the other hand, wants to be this executive model, right? It has a very corporate personality. And in the back end, obviously, there are costs. It's much more expensive And I was just on Opus yesterday. I exhausted $100 in like an hour. It's super expensive, at least the newer reasoning models with the larger context. And Gemini, we touched a lot upon Gemini, so I'm not going to go back. Llama, we did talk about the intense capital investments that we need to make. Perplexity, I didn't touch upon. So Perplexity, again, was created by people breaking out of these large companies and creating their own new startups. Now, Perplexity has a unique way where it actually does real-time searches. I did not mention this, but I have to, which means when I keep saying context, one other thing which is super important is training data is always historic, right? It's historical. So models, the frontier models, even the biggest ones of those, are not understanding of what happened right now, what's going on right now, unless they get plugged into the internet, something that is real time. So that is super important to keep in mind. And Perplexity actually built on that. They are having models that are focused on finances, right? You go in. Yeah. Anita, do you have something to say? I'm sorry. I don't know. Okay. Right. So where was that? Perplexity. So financial model. They have models that are working on stock, prices and helping with predictions. They are helping to bring this to asset management companies internally and allowing for users like you and I, if we subscribe to their pro version, to utilize those models. So it's not just that they have health data, they have statistical, geopolitical data. So they are very focused on domains and making that accessible by integrating into the real-time data of the internet. So that's a direct competition with what Gemini could be doing again. So they have these little, tugs between each other as well. And then the later two are, so there's the vision models, which associate with deep fake and the visual impact, copyrights for artists, and the deep fake issues that we could be looking at. And 11 Labs could again be somebody mimicking me, right? I can get a call, or somebody could get a call saying, "Oh, you actually asked me to give me like $1,000, right?" That could be a spam call that an AI can make if it can impersonate or make fraud. So keep these in mind. And underlying this, there is a huge geopolitical environment happening right now. And it's because of emergent capabilities. So if you haven't heard, one thing is training, but something that we haven't uncovered, and this has to be statistical, there's research around it, is there are emergent behaviors of these models which are more human-like, more reasoning-based, that we haven't been able to understand why a model behaves a certain way. And it happens based on the larger the data set you provide, the better the model starts reasoning on its own. So this is into the neural network. It's called emergent capabilities, and there is a lot of research happening in that space. Then we have benchmark saturation. Like, the AIs that we have right now, the agents or the models, they have, I don't know how many times I'm going to say AI models because this is like the whole thing is about AI models. But the benchmark saturation is a point where you cannot calculate something. And so, for example, I have on this slide like 94.6% math, right? Where does it go from there? At what point? Like, there is lack of benchmarks now in order to scale the intelligence that we are building. Energy consumption and minerals, all of this infrastructure, and billions are being put into energy infrastructure. Now, why is that? The data centers, and I had the privilege of working in running capacity management for 8 GE data centers at one point in my life. So these were global data centers that supported all the businesses of GE when it was the big conglomerate. And data centers need cooling. Like, it's like a refrigerator inside. It consumes a lot of energy and water processing as well. So energy and water are two key resources. And then talk about the semiconductor chips in there, the cables, the splints. all of that calls for minerals, which may or may not be available in certain locations. No. For United States, for us in America, we have to go and look for trade exchange. So that results in the geopolitical aspects of what we see in our policies today, right? That's the push. If we want to be leaders in the world, then we are going to have to find ways to have a certain amount of access. And there's competition between a lot of large countries in order to make that happen, which then translates into a lot of political agendas, political policies, right? And so it becomes super subjective. And yeah, power concentration. Oh my God, I have a bug here. Sorry. There was a little bug on my keyboard. So power concentration, and that is where there is a power struggle today, right? Anything you talk about, we are looking, this is the next oil, if you will, energy. And the underlying minerals and silicone that is going to be required is like the next oil in the future. And so is data. So that's where the treasures are going forward as we see it. Now, that brings us obviously to legal frameworks. As soon as it becomes so big and as soon as the implications can be that large, there is necessity to have some kind of vigilance, be it accountability within the people or the users, the companies that make those products, or governance in general at a at a country level or at a state level or at like overall humanity level. So yeah, we are literally talking about like implications to humanity, right? The big things that you hear about, and here's why. Because AI risk is not a software risk anymore. It's not like we used to have in like, oh, I developed a software, I have 15 rules, I did not code it properly, and I am liable. Like I have my liability insurance, and that's going to cover me. It's not as simple and as straightforward because you don't know where to pinpoint the responsibility, the accountability, and the traceability at this juncture. So with that, we are going to now look at some frameworks that have been deployed in this space, and we'll look at the global ones, or EU focus, because EU, the European Union, is actually the first to put out a framework that is effective as of now, right? So they had a holistic framework which looked at risk-based classification. Now, again, there is a lot of debate around risk. How do you classify risk? And do you classify it by domain? Do you classify it by the size? Does it stifle innovation? So those were the things that, a conference like the one that happened in Switzerland, recently, they had the Davos, right? Things like those get discussed in Davos. And so that's the first one. It's risk-based. We'll see in very simple terms. Again, this has been oversimplified for the reason of this awareness presentation. There is huge amounts of documentation and multiple scenarios that have been put out there on these, various slides or various links that I have shared in the deck. And then there is a coalition principle, the coalition framework, which is the OECD AI Principles Framework. I think OECD is like an organization of economic cooperation, like 47 countries coming together. And their focus has not been around risk. So risk was like, for EU, is about what's unacceptable, right? These are high risk, unacceptable things, will not let it happen. You have penalties. Versus in this case, there are guidelines and principles around human-centered values. So some of the concerns we saw on the social and physiological aspects, those take front and center. Transparency, how do you make it safer, and who's accountable? So it's a little bit softer on the principles versus penalties applied based on risk with the EU AI Act. So that's what we have here. And then this is, again, a very simplified version of the takeaways from this AI, from the European AI Act, which is, what is unacceptable? Something which is completely banned. If it has direct implications, if it directly touches upon the people, the users, in a negative way, and that's the only way for manipulation or for social scoring, then that is absolutely banned. There can be no algorithm in Europe right now because they have actually started delivering those penalties. So it is not only prescribed, but it is in practice at this point in time. So social scoring, manipulation, these are cases that can be brought to EU, and you will be, like that, those companies will be fined in billions. Now, of course, if it's a large company like Google or OpenAI, they have budgets for risk. So they will have budget like a $15 billion budget for, oh, what if I get called into, a citing for breaking one of these regulations. So, but not everyone can afford that. Then there's the high risk, which is around credits and employment, something that is subjective. Like you can't put a finger, but if it goes beyond a certain point and there are complaints around employment bias or credit faulting, then that can be filed in as a complaint and reviewed at a high risk level. And then for smaller places, and even like for small businesses, they don't want to ding small businesses as much as the frontier giants. So chatbots on your application is fine. You have some rules and regulations to look at, but that's where the stack comes out from a risk perspective with EU. Now, yeah, and this is like how that translates, not just risk-based, but how that translates into the requirements that they might have. I don't know how many of us here are working with the European Union, but a lot of digital companies do expand beyond the United States in terms of the users. So this one documents, and honestly, this is what is coming out as the key principles, no matter how you look at it, right? So risk management systems around transparency and governance, as well as human oversight. These are the key themes coming out, and NIST has the best model to give it a perspective, which I have put in a checklist for us here. Now, US, we want to have, I know we have very little time left, but I do want to bring us down to what US regulatory standards or landscape is looking like right now. At the federal and at the state level, they are in conflict, completely in conflict, and probably for reasons, right? So on the federal side, there have been reversals or deregulations happening for two reasons that were cited by the administration. One was we do not want to stifle innovation. So America needs to be the powerhouse of competing against, let's say, China or, the big world powers. So we do not want to stifle innovation. And so a lot of deregulation is an action there. And then there are states like Colorado and California, which are putting in their own versions of the EU AI Act. So anyone working in those states have to comply. And a lot of people have been complying in the digital world with GDPR and the California Privacy Act, right? So it's literally an extension of that now from an AI perspective when it comes to California. And it's a smaller version from a risk perspective for Colorado. So those are the states that are heavily working. And there is an ongoing battle right now to have all of the AI definitions at the federal level and for the states to remove any of these actions that they might have put in place. So the one framework that I will bring forward, which is actually from NIST, it's a federal organization, and it has beautifully laid out what can be done from a simplistic and effective point of view. So you can see here, this is an AI generated image, but it shows the 4 pillars of what any small business could start with. First is govern, which means let's just understand how we want to manage AI, the touch points that we want to look at. Then is map. So what are the tools that we are using, and understand each tool, each connector even, how they are treating their privacy policies. How are they treating their data? And if you need to delete it, do they have the ability to delete any data? Are they open to providing traceability into action? So let's say you use Notion. Will Notion be able to provide you the traceability of, oh, that conversation was then funneled into, let's say, your co-pilot, and that's the reason why this output came out. So that is the mapping part, and then the measure ongoing, like how do you measure it? That's the KPIs. And finally manage, like let's say something does go wrong, right? What is it that we need to do? What are the pieces that we need to put in place? So I spoke about this. So in interest of time, I'm just going to walk through the four pieces that I said and the checklist that we have put underneath. So govern. You create an audit list of all the AI tools and classify them. So start building in the practice of classification in terms of if it's a content, whether it was AI generated, AI assisted, or autonomous AI, and then the risk level based on some of the guidance that was provided. And maybe you can use the EU model for the high risk or the medium risk at this point in time, because that's kind of the closest guidance we have. Also keep in mind your industry and are you reaching out to consumers, right? Those are the two things you want to keep in mind. And then there has to be a person appointed. So accountability has become big in all of these things. If AI gets delivered out of your company, like we are having myndQ.ai delivered out of Ariana Digital, like who's going to be the risk bearer? Because we know who the users are, who's the risk bearer, and who's going to be accountable. So on your teams as well, there has to be accountability. You bear the risk, but there has to be somebody accountable in your processes. So the developer working on that understands that they are accountable for certain practices that you define for your organization. Mapping. Put in consumer notices. So this adds a lot of work, and that's like, the balance you have to set. But you can have drafts created for consumer notices if you are going out and producing either content or services that touch consumers. And if it's a B2B, then you can have standard templates put into your RFPs. And training data. Not a lot of people here are into product development, right? Because that does go into product development. But even if you're going to create small autonomous agents, and that can get bigger over time, you have to, you're mandated under the NIST framework to put in a summary. If it's digital and it's a visual or it's sound, then there will be a watermark requirement, as well as in regulated industries like finance or healthcare, there is a labeling involved. So in your supply chain, if any piece of your supply chain is handled by an AI agent, there has to be labeling. Quickly, I know we are at the top of the hour. Do we have 2 minutes? I'm going to cover this slide and the next one. The rest of it I could cover on the next session, or you can just send me questions. I know we are running out of time here. And so phase 3, very quickly, as it says, these are the basics. Opt-in, opt-out. Your opt-ins and opt-outs have to extend. Decision-making has been given as a choice. So if I have an AI agent that is a decision maker, again, I go back to the tools that we're putting out there. It helped, the myndQ.ai as an example is helping with interview guidance, right? It's a decision maker. It is an option. There are manual fallback plans. So fallbacks are important, which is standard, transparent. And how an AI operates is something that has to be documented and made visible. So the documentation and alignment part comes in over there. And this last but not the least at all, human intervention. So every framework that we will look at in the next 2 sessions when we go into the tools has an element of human in loop. And so does our process. We need to put humans in loop where if someone opts out, there's always a human or a standard process that things fall back into. And the last 2 pieces are keep trace of all of your AI data for 3 years as prescribed here, maybe more as regulations change or lesser, I don't know. And disclosure. If something does happen, it's our responsibility to put it out there and communicate to those users. That's for your brand trust. So that's how you will have brand trust. And with that, I know I think I'm 2 minutes over. But if anyone has any questions or thoughts or concerns, I'm happy to take that. But I don't want to, and this is the last slide I'm going to put out there before we leave, because this has been a little bit of a dark conversation and risk and all, but it's not about slowing innovation. I don't think that's the idea here. It's about how do you earn the right to scale, right? You put in all these things in place and scale from there. Find the benefits that you makes you competitive. All right. That was a lot of me talking.
Thank you, Yash. I know you have to go to another meeting,
Yes.
but
Yeah.
I will be sending a follow-up email with this recording and the slides, and I made a note of all the questions in the chat, so I'll forward them to Yash, so she can get back to us on that. And Nasra, I see you had your hand up. If you want to forward me your question, I can get that to Yash and get that answer back to you.
Yeah, I'll definitely put in my answers and send it to you, Evelyn. So you can send it with the slides when we, do
Yes.
that again.
But all right, thank you everyone for joining, and keep an eye
Thank
out
you
for
so
that
much.
email. Nasra, I can stay on the Zoom call for you to type up your question.
So I do have my client call next,
Yeah,
so I'm going to have to drop off. But I really appreciate everyone listening in, and thank you for your time and attention. I'll talk to you on the next one. Thank you.
Thank you, Yash.
Bye.